So, um, there is a really profound difference between reading a map and actually walking the land.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, just like there's a massive difference between, knowing someone's name and knowing who they truly are.
Yeah, those are two completely different things.
They really are. So, welcome to today's deep dive. Today, we are exploring a pretty vital piece of writing called "The Map is Not the Territory" on labels, living experience, and the failure of recognition.
It's such an interesting text.
It is, and our mission today for you listening is to dig into the philosophical and psychological dangers of using labels to define people. Because in this era of absolute information overload, we're really just trying to figure out how to genuinely connect with one another.
Yeah, and it is a critical conversation for this exact cultural moment, I think, because we're just swimming in a sea of terminology right now.
Oh, totally drowning in it.
Right. Words that were originally designed to help us navigate the complexities of human interaction, to help us find each other, they're increasingly being used to build walls instead of bridges.
Exactly. I mean, relying entirely on a label to understand a person is basically like going to a restaurant, reading the menu, and then, telling everyone you've tasted the food.
That is a great way to put it. The description on the page is definitely not the dish on the plate.
Okay, let's unpack this. If labels are just maps, right, just descriptions on a menu, what exactly are they compressing? Because before we can understand how labels fail us, we really have to look at what they're practically designed to do.
Right, and the author of our source text uses that exact concept, compression. A label is fundamentally a compression algorithm for human behavior.
A compression algorithm.
Yeah. Think about words we hear constantly right now. Words like anxious or neurodivergent or introvert.
Or like queer, addict, privileged, all those.
Exactly. You are taking a massive, just sprawling constellation of a person's life, their deeply personal histories, specific traumas, the totally unique environments they grew up in, their daily contradictions, and you are crushing all of that down into a single, highly transmissible word.
It kind of makes me think of zipping a huge high-definition video file so you can email it to
Yeah,
someone.
that's exactly it.
But, I mean, here is the thing about zipping files. When you compress data like that, you often get what software engineers call lossy compression.
Right.
To make the file small enough to send, the system permanently deletes some of the original data. So when you unzip it on the other side, the image is pixelated. It's degraded.
That is such a brilliant way to look at it, because when we apply that to human beings, the lossy compression is the person's actual lived experience.
The nuance just gets totally deleted.
Permanently deleted for the sake of an easy category. Now, I mean, we have to acknowledge right out of the gate that this compression is incredibly useful.
Oh, sure. We need it to function.
Yeah, it creates a shared vocabulary.
Yeah.
In a world of 8 billion people, finding a word for how you feel can instantly connect you to a community of others who share that experience, across vast distances.
So if the compression is so useful, where does the author say the mechanism actually breaks down?
The breakdown happens when we forget what the label was meant to be in the first place. The text uses this really beautiful metaphor. A label is meant to be a doorway.
The doorway.
Right, it's a beginning. It's the entrance into understanding someone. But the failure rises when the doorway becomes the entire room.
Oh, wow.
It's when that label stops pointing toward the person and entirely replaces them.
So it's like you walk through the door expecting a complex, fully furnished living room, and instead it's just an empty box with the label painted on the floor.
That is exactly the feeling. And what's fascinating here is the text's assertion that any living human being always exceeds their label.
Always.
Always. The author is very firm on this. Living people are in motion. They are layered, and they are entirely context-dependent.
Yeah, the text gives such a relatable example of this friction. Like, you might enthusiastically claim a label for yourself on a Monday.
Right, and then by Friday, you feel totally misrepresented by it.
Yes. Or you might inhabit a specific label fully at work, but it doesn't apply at all when you're just, sitting on the couch with your kids.
Because you are constantly evolving. A person might be in the very process of becoming something entirely new, something that the label has absolutely no language for yet.
But wait, if human beings are constantly changing and evolving, and the label is totally static, isn't there a massive psychological friction there? Like, what happens to us when an observer refuses to let us step out of that static box?
Well, that friction brings us to the text's breakdown of the two radically different forms of attention we can offer another person.
Okay.
Those are recognition and reduction.
Let's start with recognition.
So recognition is the absolute foundation of any real relationship, but it requires a resource that is often in incredibly short supply, which is humility.
How does the text define humility in this interpersonal context, though? Because we use that word a lot.
In this context, it means actively tracking the person in front of you and accepting the fact that you do not already know who they are.
Ah, so you admit to yourself that you are still finding out.
Exactly. And most importantly, it requires acknowledging that what the person says about their own inner life carries far more authority than whatever interpretive framework or label you've placed on them.
Right. And then the alternative form of attention is reduction.
Yeah. Reduction is labeling first and listening second.
If you even listen at all.
Exactly. In this mode of attention, you aren't actually engaging with the other person. You are simply using them as evidence to maintain the coherence of your own pre-existing map of the world.
So the observer slots the person into a category just so their own worldview remains undisturbed.
Yeah, it's about their comfort, not the other person.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because I have to push back just a little bit here on behalf of our everyday realities.
Sure.
I mean, I can't realistically practice deep, humble recognition with every single person I cross paths with.
Right, that would be exhausting.
Yeah. I can't do it with the cashier at the grocery store or, like, the person cutting me off in traffic. Our brains naturally want to categorize things just to save cognitive energy. So where is the line between a necessary mental shortcut and actual dehumanization?
That is the essential tension, really, because you're right, the brain is an efficiency machine, and we have to rely on heuristics to get through the day.
Right.
The line is crossed when that heuristic moves from being a brief navigational tool to a total substitute for human connection.
Okay, I see.
The source text argues that when we apply this mental shortcut to complex human relationships, like with our friends, our family, our colleagues, it causes a profound failure.
Because to be labeled is, in many cases, to be made invisible.
Yes. You take someone's actual experience, the texture of it, the specific difficulty of it, and you flatten it into something manageable and predictable.
I want you, listening to this right now, to think about the last time you were at a large family gathering. How many of your relatives were you actually recognizing? And how many had you just reduced to, like, the annoying uncle or the quiet cousin before they even walked through the front door?
That is such a good point. We do that all the time.
We really do. You flatten their entire current reality into a historical label, so you don't have to do the hard work of encountering who they are today.
And the text points out the unique loneliness that creates. The author describes the profound isolation of being in someone's presence, being neatly categorized by them, and yet remaining fundamentally unseen.
Wow.
Yeah, you aren't physically isolated. Someone is looking right at you, maybe even nodding along.
But you know deep down they're only interacting with the label they've slapped on your forehead.
Exactly. Real recognition is what the human soul most deeply craves, and when what arrives instead is just a label, that craving starves.
So this flattening of human complexity isn't just an interpersonal accident.
Yeah.
According to our source material, it has increasingly become our societal default.
Right.
But how did words that were originally meant to help us understand each other transform into these rigid boxes?
To understand why that happened, we have to look at a historical shift the text outlines. In many social contexts, labels originally functioned as essential tools of self-liberation.
Okay, self-liberation.
Yeah. For marginalized communities, self-naming was a way to claim solidarity, to accurately name their own experiences, and to resist historical erasure.
Right, so claiming a framework for your own experience on your own terms, that is a deeply empowering act.
Absolutely. The label had genuine liberating power because it was chosen by the individual.
It was a tool of agency.
Yes.
But the author notes that in our contemporary landscape, this dynamic has heavily migrated. Labels have shifted from being tools of self-understanding to becoming instruments of social enforcement. Why did that migration happen?
A large part of it comes down to how human psychology operates in a hyper-connected, overwhelming information ecosystem.
Which we definitely live in.
Oh, 100%. To feel safe in a world that feels out of control, we crave certainty. We want to quickly sort people, so we use labels to establish who is safe and who is unsafe, who has the right kind of consciousness, who is an ally, and who is an enemy.
Oh, I see. We weaponize the labels to create a sense of control over our environment.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the text points out that when we do this, the label transforms from an opening gesture into a verdict.
A verdict.
And a verdict is final, it requires no further inquiry.
The gavel strikes. Case closed.
Once that verdict is handed down, the label does all the heavy lifting for you. It justifies distance, it justifies contempt, it justifies dismissal. Or, on the flip side, it justifies what the author calls performative engagement.
Let's clarify that term for a second, because performative engagement can sound a bit academic. What does that actually look like in practice?
Right, so in practice, it looks like nodding sympathetically at a coworker because you've categorized them as an anxious person.
Okay.
So you put on your soothing voice and you play the role of the comforting colleague, but you are completely tuning out the actual substance of what they're saying.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you're interacting with your conceptual idea of their anxiety, not with the human being sitting across from you.
Precisely.
Which brings us to a really tragic irony the author highlights. When a label forecloses curiosity rather than generating it, it literally becomes a mechanism of dehumanization.
Yes.
And what's really striking is that the text points out this dehumanization happens even when the label is being deployed in the name of a progressive or humanizing politics.
That is a crucial point.
Like, you're trying to do the right thing, you're trying to be politically aware, but by reducing the person to a political category, you completely erase their specific humanity.
And to truly grasp the weight of this dehumanization, the author asks us to look at what happens when we project these verdicts onto an individual's specific lived experience based strictly on demographic characteristics.
Right.
This happens constantly with race, gender, or neurodivergence.
The author actually brings up a pretty highly debated example to illustrate this. And just to be clear for you listening, we are just imparting the author's argument here impartially. We're not taking a political side, just unpacking the text.
Exactly. We're just looking at the mechanics of the author's argument.
Right. So the argument here is about looking at a white person and deciding, before a single word is even spoken, that this person is inherently more privileged, less deserving of nuance, or more likely to be complicit in systemic issues.
Yeah, and the text argues that assuming a demographic category defines an individual's specific suffering is not actually political analysis. It is a projection.
Because doing that completely negates the individual's specific life circumstances. Right.
Yes, because the person standing in front of you has a history you do not know. As the text points out, they may have grown up in extreme poverty, they may have survived terrible violence.
Right.
They carry their own profound grief, their own marginalization, and a level of complexity that a label like white or privilege was simply never designed to hold.
And the author expands this logic to other categories as well, don't they?
Yes, they do. It is just as much a failure of encounter to assume that someone's gender reliably predicts their emotional range,
Oh, definitely.
or to assume that someone's neurodivergence predicts their capacity for nuance, or that a medical diagnosis tells you exactly what they are capable of achieving.
In every single one of those cases,
Yeah.
you are basically substituting a two-dimensional concept for a three-dimensional breathing person.
Exactly.
But the text makes a vital distinction here, which is crucial so we don't just throw the baby out with the bathwater.
All right, we have to be careful here.
The author is not claiming that systemic patterns don't exist. Structural analysis is real, and it matters immensely for policy and society. But structural analysis and interpersonal presence operate at completely different scales.
They are entirely different lenses for viewing the world.
It's kind of like trying to use a city's macroeconomic zoning laws to understand the specific, complex, emotional dynamic happening inside one family's living room on a Tuesday night.
That's a perfect analogy.
Right. Like, the zoning laws might explain why the house was built in that particular neighborhood, but they cannot tell you why the teenagers are currently screaming at their parents.
No, they can't.
When you import macro-level systemic logic into an intimate one-on-one space, the author argues you aren't in a relationship anymore. You are in an ideology.
And an ideology. I mean, no matter how sophisticated, no matter how historically grounded it might be, it cannot hold a human person. A person will always spill over the edges of an ideology.
So, if ideology and labeling fundamentally fail to hold a person, what does it actually take to stay authentically connected to the incredibly complex human being standing right in front of us?
Well, it requires what the text calls true coherence. And coherence, in this context, does not mean making sure the person fits neatly into your mental map.
So it's not about forcing the actual territory to match the drawing you made of it.
Not at all. To be coherent with another person means staying in direct, sustained contact with what is genuinely presently alive in them.
Present tense.
Exactly. Not what your framework dictates they should be experiencing based on their demographic, but what is actually happening in their inner life in that exact second.
I mean, that sounds incredibly demanding. It means you have to constantly let go of the script you brought into the conversation.
It does. And this raises an important question about our own personal tolerance for discomfort. Because genuinely seeing someone requires tolerating the severe discomfort of not yet knowing.
Oh, I love that phrase, not yet knowing.
Yep.
That is such a vulnerable place to be.
It really is. It requires staying curious far past the point where you have a convenient name for something. It requires an ongoing, active practice of asking instead of assuming.
And the hardest part.
The absolute hardest part. It requires actually updating your mental models when the answer comes back and completely defies your expectations.
So what does this all mean? Like, where does the source text leave us? Because the practical application of all this, the final invitation of the piece, is actually surprisingly grounded.
It is.
The author isn't asking us to throw out the dictionary. We aren't being asked to abandon language or pretend that categories don't exist. Language is essential. It is the only bridge we have to cross the gap between our separate, isolated inner worlds.
Yes, but the crucial caveat is that our language must remain alive. It must be provisional.
Provisional, right?
It has to be subject to constant revision as new information about a person arrives.
Mhm.
We have to hold our categories lightly. We have to allow the actual breathing person in front of us to exceed the boundaries of the words we use to describe them.
We must remain, at every single moment, more curious about who someone actually is than confirmed in who we have already decided they must be.
Hmm.
Because, a label might identify a door, but only true presence can actually walk through it.
Beautifully said.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this core takeaway from the text. Love and understanding simply cannot be transmitted through a label.
They really can't.
You can't hand someone a category and expect them to feel deeply loved or truly seen. It only happens through sustained, specific, and humble attention. Being seen for who you actually are, even just once, without the heavy baggage of assumptions, it completely changes the horizon of what a relationship can be.
It opens up a space where real connection is finally possible because you are dealing with reality rather than a projection.
Exactly. But I want to leave you with one final lingering thought to mull over on your own. We've spent this entire time talking about how we use maps and labels to flatten other people.
Right.
We've talked about the danger of projecting verdicts onto strangers and family members. But think about your own inner life for a second. If the map is not the territory, and labels are meant to be doors rather than rooms, what about the labels you have permanently attached to yourself?
Oh, that's a powerful question.
Are you using them as a provisional tool for self-understanding, a way to navigate your own complexity? Or have you accidentally locked yourself inside a room of your own making, refusing to let yourself exceed your own labels? It changes everything when you realize you aren't just the map either. You are the territory.
Such an important reminder.
It really is. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, stay curious, and we'll catch you next time.